What was the most intense experience of your life? Had my keys stolen, which started a mini riot at the max security juvenile detention center I worked at. I was working on a container ship going from West Coast to US to Japan. We got stuck in between two low pressure systems for 3 days. I experienced seas 40-60 ft. Never in my life have ever felt so small. Honestly, having a 300-pound filing cabinet fall and pin me against the wall across my collarbone. I couldn't lift it off me and could feel it slowly crushing my airspace for 10 minutes until a co-worker found me. Said filing cabinet was in a concrete vault in the basement with zero sound travel. It happened the day after I went skydiving and my thoughts were, I'm going to die here. Crushed by a filing cabinet. Edit. Because of all the comments. I am a 125-pound female. I don't actually know if the cabinet was 300 pounds. I wasn't disastrously weak at the time, but also not able to lift double my body weight. So I chose a number that I felt was more than that and a reasonable amount I couldn't lift. When I was found, 2 full-grown men had to lift the cabinet off me. Had my tonsils out when I was a kid. Was living with my dad at the time. But one particular night a couple days after, I really wanted to take a bath. And my mom had a big tub. So I went one night to stay with her for a few days. The next morning, my throat started bleeding heavily. Well, my stepdad worked second shift, so he was home and drove me to the hospital. Wound up serving a vein before I got there. Was violently vomiting blood. They had to stick a hot iron down my throat to stop the blood. Lost 4 pints total. Had 3 transfusions. Said if I was at my dad's and home alone, I probably wouldn't have made it. Was less than awesome. 3 years ago I was bitten and envenomated by a king brown on a remote site. I had effects from the venom but worse effects from the anti-venom, including temporary blindness. It took 2 years for my organs and muscles to recover. Edit. Recovery was 3-4 months for the chronic muscle and joint pain to subside. 20 months for renal lymphatic system recovery. Edit 2. Was on a mine site in Pilbara region of Western Australia. Edit 3. Flown from site to Jandakat via Royal Flying Doctor Services, RFDS, and ambulance from Jandakat to Royal Perth Hospital, RPH. Edit 4. So many questions. I've been prompted a few times now, so I might look at doing an AMA to provide more context. My mom called me as her suicide note. I live 16 hours away and had to talk to her after she took 2 months worth of strong painkillers and prescription sleep aids. She had driven her car to an abandoned parking lot and had no idea where she was. She couldn't answer any of my questions about how much she took, how long ago she arrived there, but I kept talking to her until suddenly there was just silence on the other end of the phone. I thought she died. Right there on the phone with me. I thought my mother had died. Luckily my husband called my grandpa who lives near her, and because they share the same wireless plan, the customer service agent walked him through pinging her phone and getting her location. My sister rushed there, just beating the ambulance, and they were able to save my mother's life. She was in a coma for about a week and is only now getting her life back together. She's had to make big changes to her life that unfortunately she's not financially able to do. But she's trying hard and I'm proud of her. But my god. That moment on the phone when I was screaming for my mother and there was no response still haunts me and my husband. He says I fell to the floor wailing and he had to take me to the couch. But all I remember is the terrible heartache. Holding my own intestines was the most intense moment in my life. I'll preface this story by telling you that I am now 25. I was a daredevil as a child and loved being one. I once jumped a shoddy Huffy bike off a pretty large ramp when I was 12 years old. When I landed, the front fork snapped where it passes through the front of the frame. The tire caused the broken fork to bounce up toward my stomach, ripping a 4-inch gash across my stomach. The intensity struck after I landed and momentarily blacked out. When I regained vision, I got up off the ground via my hands and knees. When I looked down, my lower intestines were hanging outside of my body. I had to cup my hand under the gash to keep them from falling further out. The scariest thing was, I was over at my mom's friend's neighbor's house under no supervision, holding my guts. I walked from the neighboring house back to where my mom was, before hightailing our asses to the nearest hospital. Edit. Scar for those interested. Hunger. Not like I skipped lunch hunger, but having no food while backpacking for 5 days. You become feverish and euphoric at the same time and stressfully obsessed about food. Your lizard brain takes full control. I ate a lot of bugs. Lost all of my body fat muscle. Would not recommend. Having a doctor who assumed someone had spoken to me about it have a glance at my chart when I was in the hospital for low red blood counts and say to me, well, you have cancer, so that's probably why. No one had said anything to me about cancer. Everyone kept telling me my bone marrow biopsy was inconclusive because of poor quality. That was how I found out. A careless, offhand, well, duh sort of comment. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. The rush of emotions I felt was unlike anything I've felt before or since. Edit. I'm doing okay given the circumstances. I'm starting my 3rd phase of treatment and my doctors are very pleased with how I'm doing. No infections or illnesses due to my lowered immune system. And got a 0.0 on my first minimal residual disease test, which is great. The doctor didn't really react much at all. She stood there awkwardly while myself and my family members freaked out. And during a period of quiet, said she assumed I knew. And wandered off. I never saw her again and was treated by another doctor. Getting my drink mixed up with the girls at a party. Getting roofied because of it. And running from the cops all night in December in a wife beater. At a BBQ down by the river, my 4-year-old nephew disappeared. There were about 10 adults around and none of us saw him go. We were in the middle of a large grass reserve. River on one side, a wetland bird sanctuary on the other, and we all panicked. After about 15 minutes of searching with no luck, we called the cops, hoping they could help us find him. It took them half an hour to get there, and by this time, we were all frantic. But none more so than my sister. She was wading through the water, screaming his name, over and over. His name is Will, and I tell you, Stranger Things gave me flashbacks. I have never been so heartbroken in my life. I was just beginning to realize that he had probably drowned and I'd never see him again when we look up and see my husband walking across the grass, my nephew holding his hand. There was a playground that every one of us had searched twice, but he somehow found his way there. To this day, we have no idea how he snuck away, or where he was for those 45 minutes. We all got very drunk that night. Called to a reported house fire. Neighbor states they hear screaming and saw smoke flames. This is farm country at 3 AM. Captain and I hop barbed wire fences as we frantically race to this farmhouse to see what happened. Yep, goats. The farmer simply approached us and said, "Howdy boys. Problem?" When asked about the screaming and fire, he said he had a brush pile burning and that my goats needed a milking. Learned how closely goats and people sounded the same. Captain shook his head as we talked back to the engine and said to never mention this back at the station. On Saturday I was rafting in grade 5 rapids in New Zealand. We flipped and I got thrown into a recirculation hole. I was being forced underwater with the power of a river with nowhere to get out. I tumbled around like a washing machine for about 30 seconds. Seemed like a lifetime. Eventually and luckily a thrust of water popped me out of the hole and into the next rapid. I got into calmer water with everyone already safe on the bank watching on in terror, hoping I was alright. My paddle snapped. I swallowed some water, but overall I lived. My friend was accidentally roofied when his friend gave him a drink another man had given him. That was his second and last drink of the night. I took him home shortly after. He became belligerent and unintelligible during the 10-minute cab ride. He was unable to walk to his door, or even stand. He was a mess, in and out of consciousness, crying, begging me to let him sleep. I called 911 because I was very concerned. Mid-phone call he begins to seize and foam at the mouth. I had to give him CPR twice. Ambulances finally came. I could not wrap my head around what had happened. I even asked the EMT, "Do I seem drunk to you? Because we drank the same amount and I feel pretty sober." They had to defibrillate him to stabilize his heart. On the way to the hospital, the ER doctor said he had Rohypnol in his system and that he probably would have died if I had let him sleep it off. The next morning, my friend said the last thing he remembered was dancing at the gay bar, drinking his drink. Almost lost my best friend. War was kinda intense. When it wasn't mind-numbingly boring staring into the desert for 12 hours. In March of this year, I still had quite the problem with oxy. One weekend when my 2 roommates were going to be gone, I had gotten myself 10-30mg oxys and was going to have a great day night of video games and relax. After sniffing 4 of them, I evidently overdosed and passed out. I later found out that they were press fentanyl pills. I woke up 18 hours later covered in my own vomit and sweat and fesses. No one found me because the people I lived with were gone. I very easily could have died, but because I was sitting in a computer chair I couldn't choke on my own vomit. It really got to me and gave me the motivation to stay clean. Having a knife held to my throat by an incredibly drunk friend who got mad at me about a game of kill, marry, duck around a campfire. I was wasted and he was wasted, and obviously kind of insane. And for some reason my reaction was to yell, "What? You're gonna kill me? Do it. Do it. You won't do it. I ducking dare you." At the top of my lungs. At the time I thought it was fine and the rational way to get him to back down. But later my friends told me they thought there was at least a 50% chance this guy was gonna slit my throat. Nice. France. On the promenade. The 14th of July 2016. Never before that day did I decide which direction to move based on where I thought bullets would be least likely to be. So I'm a type 1 diabetic. About 6 months ago, I forgot to test my blood sugar levels before going to bed. I woke up 6 hours later, keenly aware something was wrong. But I wasn't quite sure what was wrong. I jumped out of bed and stumbled, literally stumbling, to the kitchen, and desperately tried to eat something. By the time I had reached the kitchen, my blood sugar was so low that my consciousness began to recede, and I could feel it fading. I remember trying to make French fries because the pantry was empty, but in my barely conscious state I put them in the toaster instead of the oven. My last memory before I lost consciousness is being frustrated upon remembering fries do not go in the toaster, and trying to pull them out. Thank God it was unplugged. Luckily I still lived with my parents, who woke up while I was unconscious and found me try to get ice cream to eat, but being unable to get it or form a sentence. Thankfully, they got my blood sugar up and sat me down on the couch, and regained consciousness. I still remember the loss of control though, and it is intensely terrifying, even as a memory. Staring into the eyes of a stranger to whom I was giving CPR, resuscitation, and watching him die, I think a part of me went to, I hope I can grow that back by living a worthy life. 1992, April. He was 63. I was 25. It still hurts. Thank you to all those kind folks and professional medics etc who replied. We can only try to help those around us to the best of our abilities. As a side note, my dear old dad also had to do CPR many years before on a 9-year-old who drowned at a scout outing. She died too, so he was able to talk things through with me after my incident. My brother watched a man collapse and stop breathing after a heart attack jogging, raced over to him and did CPR and that man lived. So luckily not all stories end sadly, and I would still encourage those who don't know how to do CPR to learn, and I would still jump in to do the same thing if it ever happened again. I've had some pretty intense experiences, but one comes to mind pretty quickly. I was about 19 years old, and me and my dad were caught in a giant riptide. I'm a strong swimmer, and I was confident in my father. It was us and about 20 other people, while there were only about 5 lifeguards. Everyone was being pulled out to sea pretty rapidly. Some were calm and others were freaking out. I looked to my left and saw a boy, about 9 years old maybe, who was freaking out and couldn't keep his composure. I swam towards him and started calming him down, saying, "Don't worry bud, it won't last forever. Just save your energy and don't fight it. The lifeguards will be here. Lay on your back and try to float." While he's crying, I swam to him and put my hands under his back, and he started floating. I maneuvered us horizontally and then a lifeguard came and took him away. I got to shore about 30 seconds later, and he was crying while his mom was yelling at him, telling him things like, "Why didn't you listen to me? You can't swim that far away." I went up to the mom and I was going to give him a high five and tell him that he did a great job of keeping calm. As I started talking, the mother looked at me, scolded at me and looked me head to toe, grabbed his hand and walked away. retrieving my friend's personal belongings from the car he died in. It was summer, and everything was absolutely soaked in his blood. We'd been friends since childhood, and the remaining members of our group of friends, including his sister, sat in numb silence as we drove the hour-long trip back with the few everyday items we'd managed to retrieve. We left most of it there. Finding my dad dead when I was only 19. He was divorced and I was his only child, and that was the last day I had as a child before I had to grow up and face the harsh reality. I spent some time cleaning up bodies, kinda like sunshine cleaners. There was this one house. Going into the house smelled unusually normal and there wasn't signs of decay anywhere, which was unusual. Then we got to the bedroom. The guy had used plastic sheets to wall off his whole room so when he killed himself it wouldn't affect the house. It got worse from there cause he tried to use a towel to keep the gunshot contained and it basically made it into a cannon. The plastic was sealed pretty well so I was able to suit up and get my mask on before going in. Even without the smell, the first sight after pulling back the plastic was the most intense experience I think I will ever have. The second time I did acid I discovered the true meaning of life while listening to the Beatles' A Day in the Life. It was during that crazy crescendo at the end with the orchestra. Too bad I totally forgot the meaning of life like a minute later. But I totally knew it for a moment. That it was intense. Meningitis. Pain so intense you have a moment of panic just before each heartbeat because you know how bad your head will hurt during it. Only time I've experienced fever hallucinations. Eyes open I was in the hospital. Eyes closed I was somewhere else. Other times eyes closed I could still see the hospital room but there was a girl with short hair sitting in a chair watching me. They didn't want to give me a Foley bag for whatever reason so every time I went to the bathroom, which was a lot with the IV, I would spend the next 5 minutes dry heaving into a cardboard bowl, which in turn did wonders for the headache. When I could finally eat again after 6 days at hospital, turkey sandwich was the most delicious thing. Nurses later told my wife they didn't think I was going to make it through first night. Good times. The night my wife told me she had cancer. The first time I did psychedelic drugs, mushrooms, holy it was like I was living my life in a 2D black and white world, unknowingly, and seeing color in 3 dimensions for the first time. That's the best analogy I could come up with. My second year of college, I was 20. I came home from class to find my roommate passed out on the floor with an empty bottle of prescription pills next to him. He had been depressed due to some serious family issues, but I never thought it would come to suicide. I had never dealt with anything like this and was 3,000 miles away from any of my family or friends, and his mom was 6,000 miles away. His dad lived nearby but he was the cause of the depression so I was panicked. I had no idea what to do in the situation. I tried to get him up and he started to stir a little bit, which was great, but he was completely non-functional. I called my dad, who immediately calmed me down and told me I needed to call 911. I thought I might be able to get him down to my car to drive him to the hospital. I was afraid the ambulance would cost too much money for his family. Luckily my dad made me realize I was being irrational and I called the ambulance and then informed his mom, who made the situation so much worse. They pumped his stomach and he was released from the hospital a few days later. His dad came to be with him and took me home later in the evening. It was such an awful car ride. My friend attempted suicide 2 more times and each time I was the one who found him and called the ambulance. It was a really rough couple of months which forced me to leave college and move back home to finish out school near my family. I'm happy to report my friend is fine now and doing really well in all aspects of life, but it was really scary for a while. I don't know how I managed to keep my head about me, for the most part. Warning. Long post. Woke up for work about 6 months ago and my leg was numb tingly like I slept on it wrong and it was asleep. Got up and tried to walk it off and get the blood flowing while I got ready for work. Did that for about an hour with no change. By this time I was feeling really strange. Started discharging whatever was in my stomach guts explosively from both ends. Meanwhile, my leg has steadily started to swell and become very painful, even though it was still sleeping. Call my boss and tell him what's going on and that I need to take a personal day. He tells me that I sound very strange and to go see a doctor. By this time my leg is swollen so big that it feels like my skin would split. Muscles are contracting to the point my leg is rock hard. I can't even bend my knee. Drag myself on my stomach to the bathroom to evacuate whatever is left inside me. I considered trying to sleep it off, but I'm feeling so horrible that I call 911. By the time they arrive, I'm barely conscious. They rush me to the hospital where they determine blood flow has somehow stopped reaching my lower leg, under my knee. Also, I'm in double kidney failure. Doctors are stumped. They life flight me to Pittsburgh UPMC. I'm rushed to surgery where they split my leg from my crotch to ankle on the inner side and waist to ankle on the outer side in order to relieve the pressure from swelling. Meanwhile, my muscles are contracting so bad I thought they would snap my leg bones. One of the most painful feelings I've ever felt. All the while the docs are frantically trying to fix my kidneys. I was laying in that bed slowly dying. Apparently the circulation was cut off to my leg as I slept, causing the calf muscle to die. When that happens, the muscles release lots of chemicals, toxins. My problem was it released a massive amount of potassium and my kidneys couldn't handle it. Finally the surgeons tell me that they will have to go in and remove the dead tissue, but there is a small chance they may have to remove some of my leg. Well, when I wake from the anesthesia, I can tell something's not right. I look down to see that my left leg is gone from about 3 inches above the knee. Talk about intense. I've gone from working 60+ hours a week to disabled and sitting at home. Talk about a life changer. TLDR. I woke up one morning with a numb tingly leg and 12 hours later it was amputated. PS. I will be getting the newest state-of-the-art prosthetic knee, leg, ankle, foot, rear knee on the 14th of December. I can't wait to walk again. Update. I went today for a final fitting for my new leg. Here's a picture. Rear leg and ankle, foot. I held a bag of weed once in college. I don't mean to brag, but I'm a dangerous outlaw, wanted dead or alive. Once fractured my left nut riding an ATV in Pismo. Edit. That's the phrase the doc used. Went off a razorback at full speed and went over the ATV, which landed on just my left nut. Somehow also broke my arm, which didn't get noticed or felt for several minutes. Got surgery to remove the damaged tissue but couldn't go under because I copyright airing beating shortly beforehand. Oh, and this was all the day before my 21st birthday too. Counter-terrorist operation in Tbilisi, Georgia a few weeks ago happened in the building where I live. 16 hours of random explosions and gunshots while waiting to be evacuated from the building. First, a little backstory. I have spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, a genetic disease that slowly wastes away your motor neurons. I have never walked and use a wheelchair to get around. About a year ago, the first ever treatment for SMA, Spinraza, was fast-tracked by the FDA out of the trial phase and made available to the public. The most intense experience of my life has to be laying on a hospital bed, receiving my first dose of the drug and feeling a deep sense of hope for the first time in a very long time. Edit. Thank you all so much for your support and words of encouragement. I really appreciate it. You all just made my day. Edit 2. Thank you very, very much for the gold. Jumping out of a plane for the first time in airborne school. I had a miscarriage followed by a few years of terrible depression and anxiety so severe I could barely function. My partner put up with it for a year and left a week before Christmas, and my cat died a few weeks later. It was not a pleasant way to spend my mid-20s. Finding out that I had unknowingly been friends with my birth father for years. Update. Check my comment below for the short version of the story. Maybe I'll write a book someday. My best friend. He was my cousin, may as well have been my brother, got hit by a bus in London whilst listening to music on his iPod a couple of years ago, and the bus driver essentially crushed him to death under the front left wheel by lowering the passenger platform instead of raising it. I was at work and I got a call to get to London ASAP, and to see half of his skull caved in and subsequently watch him die was the most intense and harrowing experience of my life. I watched my mother die from the big C years before that, but this was different level. Duck. I miss you, Dave. His username was @Gravy727. Always makes me cry reading through his comments. Edit. If anyone wants to see him, please Google David Wood, Farringdon. I grew up in the same village of him and our mums were sisters. He was essentially my brother and we were always inseparable. He donated 3 of his organs when he passed to save lives, and his accident occurred on the day after he got his dream job in St. Bart's Hospital in London as a radiographer. He was walking to meet his girlfriend for lunch. We did everything together and he was a week away from proposing to his girlfriend of 7 years. He's buried next to my mum, so my 2 bestest friends are keeping each other company. He was truly an incredible guy and I miss him so much. The outpouring of love has been overwhelming. Thank you. I really needed it. My emergency C-section. I felt so sick from the meds and could do nothing but lay there and accept my fate. I could feel the pressure of being cut open and dug into. Then I felt major things being wiggled around and plop. It felt like one of those dead whales on the beach exploding. My baby was out of me and wailing. Then he was plopped on my chest looking pissed off. I actually had come in the day before leaking and they sent me home because the tests were negative. Well, my water really broke 24 hours later. I labored to a 6 cm before getting an epidural. My son's heart was decelerating in the womb every contraction I had, and there were smaller, abnormal ones on top of big ones. They did an amla infusion to see if it would help him a bit, but it was clear his cord was wrapped. Being cut open was interesting. The worst part was the way the drugs made me feel. When they plopped him on me and were sewing me up, I literally just wanted him off me. In the recovery room afterwards, I felt like I had to puke and the nurse told me to clench my stomach. Yeah, right. I was numb up to my armpits. Full stop. Discovering that my quiet and chilled out 6-day-old baby girl was actually dying and needed emergency open heart surgery. Her condition had not been picked up and we were blissfully unaware. I'll always be so grateful to the health visitor who came to see us on day 6 and expressed her concerns. Even then, we were expecting a wasted trip to the hospital. Ended up in the front of an ambulance stopping traffic. She's 2 now and full of beans. I've gained like 5 new phobias from this thread. This might sound strange, but meeting the girl I'd marry 6 months after running into her in a grocery store. Found a dead baby in a patient's bed after induction of labor for intrauterine fetal demise. I did not know it was possible to feel faint while seated. A close second was when a stranger attempted to sexually assault me. That was why I was stressful and had long-lasting effects.